Thank you, Steve. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with you and the entire class. I'm very excited. So, as you know, you already have the presentation, and a very warm welcome to all of you. I'd like to start by saying that studying faith is not something to understand the bygone era. You know, faith is very empowering, and we would want to approach it as something that we can use our current daily lives to attain our worldly goals, not just attaining our spiritual goals, but to attain our worldly goals by bringing out the best in us. So, what we are going to learn today in class, if anything arises your curiosity, if you're interested, like Steve mentioned, please do feel free to practice it. You don't have to be a practicing Hindu to practice it. You can be following any of the world religions and still practice it, or even be at the point of an atheist or agnostic at this juncture, but also approach it from a secular point of view. Why I say practice is important is once you practice it, you would want to jot down your experiences. So first thing is acquisition of knowledge and information, which we are going to do today. The second thing is if something touches your heart, practice it and see what it feels like. You know, experience it yourself firsthand. Jot down your experience. If you think it is helpful in some way, you know, our experiences are our best alibis. They give us conviction and clarity, help us determine what works for us, what doesn't. So we would like to keep an open mind and approach it as something personal that you individually make use of it. All right. So let's move on to the third slide, please, Steve.
Okay.
Thank you. So here we start at the very beginning. So before I explain you the slides, we would want to be cognizant of the information that ancient India, which we called Bharat, stretched over a very expansive geographical territory. You know, the western borders were with the borders of Iran, while the east went to Indonesia. So there were many ethnic groups, you know, people coming from various backgrounds, ethnicity, and sects that contributed to the evolution of faith, as we call the Sanatana Dharma, the eternal laws, and popularly known as Hinduism today. So it's not an ethnocentric faith, and it evolved over generations, you know, transgenerational contributions in that expansive region. So the another thing is that you know, even before the Vedic scriptures were written down, there were thousands of years when these philosophies, the spirituality of the land, were passed on from one generation to the other via oral traditions. So via the methods of Shruti, which is listening, and Smriti, which is retaining in your memory. Shruti and Smriti, the oral tradition, played a very important role in later years where the Vedic scriptures were written down finally, and they drew experiences of the ancestors, you know, what went on. So the Indic astronomy, they divide you know, the whole timeline, the time period, into four distinct eras, which are also called the yugas. So we see the four eras are Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dwapar, and Kali, which is the modern era where we are living in, each lasting for about 12,000 divine years. And they have some calculations how it translates to modern day numeric system. Conceptual analysis of devas and asuras, that is one of the most salient points. So I'll start with that. So who were the devas? The Devas were supposed to be people with divine manifestations, filled with virtues. As many of us know already, what are the seven cardinal virtues? So, number one, prudence, self discipline, justice, temperance. So, temperance is the self discipline part, prudence is the pursuit of knowledge, fortitude, moral courage, faith, hope, and charity. And who were the asuras? On the other hand, were people with vices. Seven vices: pride or ego, greed, and then lust, which is like illicit desires, not valid sexual desires, but illicit desires, envy, which is jealousy, gluttony, any excess or addiction. It could be, I mean, if we are on social media 5 hours a day, that's also considered gluttony, right? So any obsessive compulsive desires, anger, sloth, which is laziness. So as per the dharmic scriptures, in the earliest era, Satya Yuga, Devas and Asuras, they lived in two separate worlds. They would only come together when there was a huge war or conflict of interest. In the next era, which is the Treta era, so they lived in the same world, but were easily identifiable, by their characteristics. And they again came together at a great war. The depiction of this era is made in the Hindu epic Ramayana, which is the study of his lifetime and how he fought a war with the Asuras and was victorious, attaining balance and justice in the land. The third era was the Dwapar era, which is from the period of the Hindu epic Mahabharata, where Krishna, actually, there was another great war, of course. So every era has a great war. And Krishna advised the good side, people who were with Dharma. He advised them how to win that war. And it was very hard. In this era, we see Devas and Asuras lived in the same family. So first era, Devas and Asuras lived in two separate worlds. Second era, they lived in the same world, but they were easily identifiable. Third era, they lived in the same family. So the war happened between one set of brothers and against their cousin brothers. So it was, you can imagine the conflict of conscience. At one point, a great warrior, Arjuna, who was with the good side, said he doesn't want to fight that war. He cannot shoot an arrow at his cousin brother, his uncle, his nephew. And he was going through tremendous conflict of conscience when Krishna advised him of what is the just thing to do and what are his duties and obligations. So his words, Krishna's words, are compiled in the holy book of the Bhagavad Gita. So the first three eras are together known as the age of the Puranas. And another salient feature from that era was the conceptual, the Holy Trinity. So the Holy Trinity consists of three divine inspired figures: Brahma, associated to creation of all living and celestial phenomenon; Vishnu, associated to preservation; and Shiva is the balancer. By destroying all evil thoughts and actions within us and in the world, he helps us attain the balance internally on civilizational scale, also in the cosmic scale. So the Kali Yuga, the current era where we are living in, started around 3102 BCE. And the Indus Saraswati civilization, the ancient Indian civilization, also known as the Mohenjo-daro Harappan civilization, after the two prominent cities built during that time, was started around 3500 BCE, which was contemporary to the Nile Valley Egyptian civilization and also the Sumerian, Mesopotamian, Babylonian civilization. So next slide, please, Steve. So, as we discussed, the age of Puranas, the salient features were oral tradition, wars between good and evil, and in the end, always good sustained and survived and continued with the progress of human civilization. So, faith gives us hope, not all is lost. So, in the current era, we see a lot of confusion, conflicts, and conflict of conscience internally, externally, but there is always hope. So, attainment of moral victory and cosmic balance. And nature worship, of course, every single Hindu ritualistic invocation of divinity starts by paying respect to the five elements, fire, water, air, earth, and ether, and the concept of reincarnation. So they say that karma is associated to many lives. What we do, our deeds in one particular life adds up, and that along with whether we lived just proper life, depending on that, it contributes to the spiritual destiny of humankind. So we have many lives, but every life cycle we are urged to do certain things. So what is that? We'll move on to the next slide, the Vedic age. So Indus Saraswati, you already know the architecture, metallurgy, cattle economy, usage of coins and seals. So how do we know about those people? By these, excavations, pottery, maritime trade was important that time. They had a very globalized world. It's hard to think, but the Indus seals have been found in the Middle East and everywhere. So we know there was a lot of thought exchange and exchange of goods and traditions as well. Inscriptions consisted from that era. Remember, we were still going through the oral tradition, and whatever they wrote consisted mostly of ledgers and sounds. All right, Steve. So the Vedic age is extremely significant in the sense that it was probably one of the most humanistic eras in the progress of civilization in the region. So whatever the concepts, the spiritual concepts that existed in the region, in the Vedic era, they wrote the scriptures down and gave them some sort of scientific validity. And the exponents that emerged out of debates and analysis and rationale kind of shaped the future course of the civilization. So they wrote many, many books in that era, and pursuit of knowledge was extremely important. So Sanskrit-based learning, and also not just the spiritual enlightenment. That period is marked by worldly achievements as well. So everything was structured, how our daily lives are going to be. So human life were divided into four different sections. The first is brahmacharya, which is studenthood. Second is garhastha, which is marital life, conjugal life. Third is vanaprastha, when you're still with the family, but in the process of detachment. And the fourth is sannyas, which is renunciation. What do the Vedic scriptures consist of? So the four most salient books are, of course, the four Vedas, the Rig Veda, the Samaveda, the Yajur, and the Atharva. So the Rig Veda has the hymns, which introduces the concept of divinity and divine manifestations, ritualistic invocation of divinity. And every Veda has a corresponding Upanishad, which draws the conclusion, the concept introduced in the Vedas. The Upanishad concludes it. That's why they are also called the Vedantas, or the conclusions of the Vedas. So the Rig Veda Samaveda had, hymns and chants and music associated to it. So the earliest Indian classical music, both vocal and instrumental, were advancing based on the hymns of Samaveda. The Yajur Veda actually talks about various energy, phases and ecosystem in the universe and how we are connected with them on every human, on an individual level. What is our relationship with nature and universe at large, and how our consciousness, so that is an important thing. They introduced us to the concept of consciousness and mind. Purusha and Prakriti, the masculine energy and the feminine energy. So every man or woman, boy or girl, has these things ingrained in them. The intersectionality of the energies, the consciousness, which is that subtle feeling in our heart, at our heart center, and the third eye, that location, the pineal gland of our mind that processes the perceptions. So consciousness is dedicated to sun to enlighten us, and the third eye, our worldly perceptions, are dedicated to the moon for mental prowess, intellectual excellence. So these two need to be connected for us to live a conscious, just a successful life with fulfillment. Okay. So there was another salient feature of the Vedic age was the emergence of the Varna Jati system. So I would like to mention here that you're all familiar with the concept of caste system. So caste is a Portuguese word, so it doesn't exist in the Hindu Shastras. But what exists is the Varna Jati ecosystem to foster interdisciplinary approaches to material and spiritual functioning of societies. So the Varna Jati ecosystem were divided into four broad classifications, basically. So you have the Brahmins. Remember, Brahmin is not equal to Brahman. Brahman means a realized being, and somebody from any caste, irrespective of gender or social standing, can become a Brahman, a highly realized human, by pursuit of divinity following certain path. Whereas Brahmin, the caste or the Varna Jati, as I would call, is where are the people whose highest loyalty is to study the scriptures and pass on to that knowledge to next generation. The second was Kshatriyas, whose highest loyalty was to defend dharma. The third were Shudras, who were the manufacturers and the innovators, and everything produced in the land, whether agriculture-wise or metallurgy or buildings or temples or architectures or coins or, everything were concerned with the Shudra community. And the Vaishyas, who were the merchants, they would go all around the world, and there was a huge exchange of goods in the trading system, and whatever was not available in ancient India, Bharat, they would bring it to India, and whatever the Shudra community produced in India, they would sell it to rest of the world. So very nicely functioning ecosystem. But throughout the discourse of thousands of years, there were many invasions. India has also gone through colonization, and the societal structures and functioning kind of dwindled. So we have gone through many reforms to kind of cater to the modern era and customize it accordingly. So in 1955, the law of untouchability was passed. So any form of discrimination based on the modern day equivalent of caste system were banned and enforced by the law. So on and so forth. There were many reforms that happened. So what were the three main life goals as per the Vedic Shastras? The scriptures: dharma, karma, moksha. So dharma is based on the universal laws, and it's our primary duties and obligations to live a just life. Karma is our thoughts and actions and how we lead our life. There cannot be a disconnect between what I think and what I do. What I do, my actions should be reflective of my conscious thought process. And moksha, finally, liberation. So, first is self actualization, self realization, and then finally, liberation from the cycle of birth and death. And then we see Sanskrit based schools, which were Gurukulam. So these huge, the scriptural guides were taught in those schools. And boys and girls, actually, both, it was compulsory for both to have their basic education in the Gurukulams. In fact, about 27 women scholars they contributed in writing the Vedic scriptures. They contributed to the Vedic scriptures. There could be more, but we know of 27, and there were many men as well. So that's a snapshot of the Vedic age, what exactly happened. And then we go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to briefly introduce you to the concept of avatars and prophets. Very interesting. So from the first three eras, remember we talked about the age of Puranas, the first three eras, we see avatars coming up and helping humanity attain that balance. So we have Shiva, we have Ram, and we have Krishna. So the Shiva, there is, number of stories related to his time in the Puranas, and the Ram is depicted in the epic Ramayana, Krishna depicted in the epic Mahabharata. So the avatars were considered to be divine manifestations. And the prophets were considered to be humans who had impacted in local levels for people. They have gone through serious ascete penance and practice and meditation and attained divine grace in order to help humanity cope up with conflicts and struggles. And so we had many prophets emerging in the land. Mahavira, who talked about ecological balance, talked about preservation of nature and a relationship with it. Gautama Buddha, his time, there were a lot of conflicts among the kings, and Gautama Buddha went to the forest and meditated for 10 years before he came back and taught. And he was a very astute scholar. He taught in Nalanda University. There were four main universities in ancient India: Nalanda, Takshashila, Vikramshila, and Ujjaini, in four different locations in ancient Bharat. We have Shankaracharya, who basically, consolidated many school of thoughts. So after receiving this gamut of information, reading all these scriptures, many people became sectarian in their approach that, okay, I just want to do this, I want to follow that. And so Shankaracharya kind of brought everything together. He traveled by foot from South India to North India. I don't know how he did it, but he did it. And then Guru Nanak, very prominent, the founder, a Sikh guru, who, during that time, as you know, the state of Punjab is in the western front of India. And there were many invasions, foreign invasions happening through that corridor. And Guru Nanak kind of invoked people to the protection, preservation of dharma. So very important figure in the history of human civilization in India. So we go to the next slide. Ritualistic invocation of divinity. So, what does this process really entail? So, many of you who are, you have an exposure to Hindu homes. You see, many photos, or statues, or stones, or, some symbolism. As there are many things. So, like I said, that there is the Vedic scriptures actually guide us to a very concise structural approach to how to invoke divinity and how the divine manifests through the object of meditation. So, a statue is not manifested until it goes through that whole cycle of invocation with certain supportive materials to generate that ambience of spiritual enlightenment. And there are bija mantras, which are like the salient, the most important chants dedicated to each of these rituals. And there is this whole process of immersion as well, as if to end the ceremony in a formal way. So once this process of manifesting divinity in the object of meditation happens, be the object a photo or a statue or a stone or certain symbolism, then that object becomes a vigraha, divine represented through a manifest form. So that's what we are supposed to worship in order to feel our connection with divinity. So that's the path. So certain objects are used as supportive materials that enhance the process. Like conch shell and bells. So hearing, the Vedic age, actually, they did a lot of study on humans and, they came up with the chakra, the energy centers in our body itself and the five senses. And so visuals, hearing, smelling. These are all extremely important part of experiencing divinity. So I'll show you, my thing. If you can all of you see this? Can you see this? So I have a conch shell here. So we blow the conch shell at the very beginning of the invocation, like this. And that clears in opening up our ears. And then we have the bell. We have a little thing to hold the holy water of Ganges, the lamp, and we put incense in these little holes. And so the fragrance, the whole experience of it becomes spiritually inspired. Then there are things like the holy basil leaves, fruits, and flowers as offerings, and the chants, of course, the Sanskrit mantras that are extremely important. And if chanted in some number of times, most of them 108 times, they evoke an electromagnetic field. Sound energy is extremely powerful. So they generate that electromagnetic field, which is conducive towards divine spiritual enlightenment. Next slide, please, Steve. So important books and what to expect in them. So before that, if anybody has any questions about the slides that we went through so far, please feel free to ask me or text here, or you can email me and Steve later as well. So I'm assuming we are all good so far, are we? All right. So important books. So books were written approximately 1500 BCE onwards, but many depicted events from previous eras. So from the age of Puranas, traditionally there were 18 Puranas comprising Brahmanda, Devi, Shiva, Vishnu, Bhagavata, Kurma, so on and so forth. The epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, I already mentioned. The Bhagavad Gita is part of the epic Mahabharata. And Panchatantra, which is a very interesting book, compilation of short stories. It is actually one of the most translated books in the world. It has been translated to all the Slavic languages, Indo-European languages, and it basically has stories based on moral sciences, animal fables, like Aesop's fables. If you read it, it's very similar. And from the Vedic age, there are many books, like I said, Rig, Sama, Yajur, Atharva, and they have the four Upanishads as well associated to them, like Atreya, Chandogya, Brihadaranyaka, and Mandukya, to draw the conclusions of the concepts introduced in the Vedas. Dharma Shastra, about 100 books based on various topics related to ethics, best practices, etc., kind of a legal structure. So Manusmriti, Manava Dharma Shastra, or Laws of Manu, where it actually had 10 commandments for, basic legal structure for how humans should be operating in a civilized society. Yoga Sutra by Patanjali, extremely important. So yoga means connection between your mind, body, spirit, with focused breathing techniques. So it has, it explains everything, what each position means and how it helps. So it sensitizes the parasympathetic nerves in our body. So the whole, the health, biological, spiritual, physics, chemistry of the body could be understood very well by practicing yoga on a daily basis, and also meditations, focused breathing. Kama Sutra by Vatsyayana, another very important book. It's about, so sexual energy is important to harness. So according to the Shastras, when you are choosing to get married or choosing your life partner or a committed relationship, there are three components which are important and we should pay attention to: Artha, Kama, and Moksha. So Artha is the wealth. It could be spiritual wealth. It could be the wealth of knowledge. It could be acquisition of material wealth, however way we would like to approach it. But there has to be some sort of symmetry or compatibility between the partners in the area of Artha. And the next is Kama, sexual compatibility, extremely important for both to conjugate and together pursue the spiritual and material goals. And moksha, so these help us attain liberation in conjugal life. Sushruta Samhita, Compendium of Sushruta, an important book on medicine, surgery, Ayurveda. It's available online. Those who cannot read Sanskrit, there have been many translations from various scholars over the years. The Ashtadhyayi of Panini, it's about the Sanskrit grammar, how the language evolved, and what are the basic tenets of the, grammar and sound. So Sanskrit, each letter also can be considered an alphabet because it has various sounds and various ways it can be used and partitioned. Um, we had Brihat Samhita by Varahamihira, an encyclopedic work on mathematics, time, planetary motion, astrophysics, etc. Very, very, it's fascinating how back in the days people thought of all these like geometry, trigonometry, algebra, calculus, and it is reflected in temple architecture. It is reflected on, various innovations from those times. And Mahabhaskarya by Bhaskaravan, and very prominent mathematician who wrote on decimals, algebra, geometry, astronomy, etc. There were various other books as well, depending on your interest area. You could look up or you could write to Steve or me. We could make some recommendations. There've been many, many hundreds and thousands of commentaries from extremely elite school of thoughts and scholars that have also been published based on the works of these earliest scholars, or as we say, the Rishi lineages, the sages who practiced, experienced, and pursued intellectual knowledge and came up with these books. So many thousands of years back. It's amazing. So we move on to the next slide. So I would talk a little bit about my personal spiritual journey. I'm just, it's been a long journey, really a very personal, solitary journey. I grew up in a very secular home in Calcutta in eastern India, and the state was under communism that point of time. So, the religiosity was not encouraged, and I had very little exposure. But what I had was you know, uh, an intense library in my home. So we lived in a joint family. So my dad, his sisters, everybody went to university and, collected all these books. And being an only child of the family, I inherited all those books. So for the first 20 years of my life, I was a voracious reader. I grew up in a time when there was no internet, so very little distraction. I started with the Greco-Roman literature, Aristotle, Plato, and later from the period of Renaissance, Machiavelli, Cervantes, a lot of Russian literature. In fact, Leo Tolstoy's The Resurrection moved me very, very deeply. Wonderful. Then later, Nietzsche, Albert Camus, and I also read a bit about ancient China, Taoism, Confucius. So lots of reading, And so from India, I went to Europe, then came to United States after I got married. And I was still reading, it was still number one, the pursuit of knowledge and acquisition of information. So I wasn't practicing anything still. So after I had the baby, it kind of accelerated my pursuits, and actually, take a pause and practice it changed my life. So on a daily basis, this is the daily practice, which has been advocated in the Shastras. So you start your day. So waking up. So these are very practical things. Once you do it, you would know how you feel it. And it actually empowered me in many ways to attain my worldly goals in terms of, it increased my productivity, and it increased my focus and concentration. It made me way more self-disciplined about to manage my time well. And so what they had, in the scriptures, what they say is the best time to wake up is 1 hour, 40 minutes before sunrise. Okay. So it's extremely theoretical. And why? Because that time the air contains most sattva, pure oxygen. So as much purity we can get in this time and age, we have been polluting our atmosphere a lot, but even then, 1 hour, 40 minutes before sunrise is the time when you get the purest oxygen in the air. So it's extremely conducive to be outside and meditate. So first thing, after you wake up, you do ablution, which is cleansing of your body and mouth. And they say that sprinkle water 11 times in your eyes, 11. And so that you move from that sleep state, dream state to reality. So that helps with that transition. Oftentimes when we wake up, we're still feeling, very sleepy and lazy. So sprinkle water 11 times, then meditate, and then yoga, and then get on with your daily duties and chores and studies. Tarpan, sometimes I do tarpan, which means offering. Sometimes I do it right after my meditation. So tarpan could be offering is supposed to be towards God and our ancestors and people who came before us. It could be done in many ways. You could offer water. So I basically go water the plants, and or you could offer food or flowers, to your altar or divinity. And then you end the day during sunset in the evening. You end the day with contemplation. That is basically you review the whole day, what you did, how you did, and what you can do better next morning. And so meditation is focused breathing, contemplation is focused thinking. So it's extremely important to reflect and review, every day. So every day, every week, every month, every year, and that all adds up to the spiritual energy and manifests into attainment of higher knowledge and spiritual quest. So humility is actually the first stepping stone. We must admit that we don't know enough. And questioning is good, actually, because when we question, then we seek an answer, seek a solution. If we seek something, we go somewhere. If we don't seek anything, we just remain where we are. So this is a quest, it's a process. I also engaged with some human rights related activism. My vocation, karma, the deeds, actions, profession, that's important. Charity, as much and with my humble self I can do. Domesticity. So since the birth of our baby, I've been almost cooking every day. So health is extremely important in Ayurveda, which is part of the Atharva Veda. They talk about all the ingredients and dimensions of biosciences. That help us, because if the health is not good, you will not feel motivated to do anything. So health is very important, and parenting, of course. So that's pretty much my spiritual journey so far. Thank you for listening to me.
Great. Are you, Somanjana, do you have any mantras or chants that you could do for us? Would that be possible? Or I don't know if you'd like to do that or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so all the mantras and chants are Sanskrit based, and like I said, there are bija mantras or the main mantra. Um, Associated to every form of invocation of divinity or the divine manifestations around us. So, one thing, so before we engage with any ritualistic invocation, the first step is to pay respect to the five elements. And sun has been, like I said, he's associated to our consciousness, the subtle feeling in our heart. And so the mantra dedicated to the sun is extremely important. It's called sun salutation. We have corresponding postures in yoga as well. So I would like to render that chant. It's called the Gayatri mantra, one of the most sacred mantras. Om Bhurбhuvasvaha Om Tatsaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat. Thank you. Hope that helps.
Ooh, wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So we heard a wonderful, extensive information about Hinduism as Somanjana expressed. The thing to keep in mind, why I had Somanjana chant for us, because in my estimation, if you get knowledge from the slides, that's one thing. The essence of all the things that Somanjana presented can be felt and experienced in the chant itself. The chant itself is a way to experience what she's talking about. You with me? So there's different ways to access knowledge and experience the spirit of Hinduism through knowledge and through chanting. And so us hearing, and I don't know about you, but I could feel the energy from the chant. I could feel it like deep inside me. So you can be touched and learn something, but you can be touched and learn something from what you experience in the chant itself. Does that sound accurate, Someone, John? I don't mean to step out of bounds, but I'm trying
No,
to.
absolutely, Steve, you're totally correct. Because, like I said right in the beginning, if you experience it yourself, you have the conviction. You know what works for you, what doesn't.
Yeah.
So, when, like I said, the chants actually invoke an electromagnetic wave. Around us, and that atmosphere is conducive for our connection with the higher self and divinity. So
Yeah.
when we chant, usually, it is part of the meditative practices. So you close your eyes and you focus on the midpoint of your eyebrows and chant loudly so you can hear it. And your mind is able to process the information. And then you experience something in that subtle center of your heart. So when you experience it yourself, you might want to document it, that how did your day go? Did it help you in any way?
Yeah.
And then go from there.
Yeah. Wonderful. Absolutely. But thanks a lot, Somanjana. I'll give you this